It is a blue blood matchup with two awesome freshmen. We're going to learn a lot about the Jayhawks tonight. KU takes on North Carolina in a battle of the blue bloods.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. We already had a crossover episode with Isaac Shade talking North Carolina. We're going to get even deeper into this Kansas-North Carolina game and breakdown on today's episode. We're going to get into the importance of the game, top storylines, some of the top matchups, North Carolina deep dive scouting report, and we'll get into the matchups of the game that'll determine who is going to come out on top of this one. Let's start right there. What is the importance of this game for KU? I think really for both teams, it's actually a similar one. I think both teams are trying to show that they are, dare I say, back. I know we try to reserve that for like when Texas and Miami were trying to get back in college football, but after a couple down years, relatively, one, you still got a 4 seed. But after a down year last year, certainly for KU, and for North Carolina being 11 seed that a lot of people didn't think should have made the NCAA tournament, ended up making it, winning their first 4 game. Both these teams are looking for much better seasons than they had a season ago. Like, that's no secret. And I think, I would expect both of them to. Like, I think both teams are being slept on. It is unfortunate because I do think this could be a situation where whoever loses the game is going to continue to be slept on. It almost reminds me of last year, Kansas beat Michigan State in the Champions Classic, and then Michigan State ended up having a really good season when it was like, okay, they might be a little underrated coming into the year. And that could be the situation here, right? And obviously, you'd take a season like that where you're a 2 seed and, you have a shot in an Elite 8 game to try to make a Final Four. But I think this is an opportunity for both teams on kind of a national spotlight. Like the college basketball games on Wednesday and Thursday night, it just sucked this week. Like there was nothing that was like drawing a national audience or national attention. That changes with KU North Carolina. And so it is an opportunity to kind of, and at the end of the day, like how much does the national media hype really matter? I don't know. Probably not much, but maybe for a team and a program that, haven't had as much success over the last couple of years as they're accustomed to, as you expect, boosting that confidence at the early part of the season to see what you could be, I don't think that hurts, certainly, right? As long as it's kind of contained confidence in a way. But it is an opportunity to show that, yes, like, I think this team is underrated, but if you lose this game, that's going to be harder to talk about afterwards, right? And if you do win this game, I know it's an exhibition game, but then you can start pointing to and being like, man, you have basically 2 really good road ACC wins already at this point of the season. But it also is just kind of a fun game. And obviously we've had a lot of great memories with KU North Carolina recently, right? Last year was actually a really fun game in general. Obviously the 2022 national championship with the crazy comeback for KU. You think back to the 2012 Elite 8 game where, Tyshawn Taylor and Thomas Robinson take KU to the national title game, and that's who they had to go through in the Elite 8. You think back to the 2008 Final Four where Kansas just blows them out, and Brandon Rush at one point is like outscoring North Carolina, and Kohl Aldridge is giving you contributions. There have been a lot of fun moments for Kansas against Carolina recently here. Can they add another one here? That's kind of the question here, right? And I think obviously beyond all that, all the hoopla and the hype, this is a very important game for a lot of individuals. I think, of course, we all want to see Darryn Peterson go off in a setting like this where it is the national setting and everybody's oogling and awing over him. And that's entirely possible, which, by the way, seeing him, the picture that KU posted where he like has a banana and a Gatorade in his hand, it's like they are going to try everything to keep him from cramping. And that is kind of a storyline coming into this one. Like, can he avoid the cramping? But obviously you want to see him and you want to see some other players. I think this is a really important game, though, for other guys because, like, I don't know, even if Peterson went out there and had like a bad shooting night and had like 12 points or something, I wouldn't walk away feeling that different about Darryn Peterson. I'd just be like, oh, he just had an off night. I think I almost view this as like a bigger opportunity for guys like Kohl Rosario or Jayden Dawson, or who's going to be that potential role player if KU does win this game. What if there's a role player for KU that ends up having a big moment or hitting a couple big three. Like, what if Jayden Dawson came in the game and hit his first 2 threes and ends up playing 20 minutes and plays really well in 20 minutes? And all of a sudden we're talking about, okay, that's going to have an impact on the rotation. What if Kohl Rosario breaks out of his shooting slump? What if, I don't know, like Bryson Tiller continues to look like the guy we saw in like the Louisville game where it's like, yeah, you're one of KU's 5 best players. What if Flory Bidunga dominates? Like, are we back on he could be an All-American train? There's a lot of, I think, individual things that I'm going to be really interested to see how this goes for KU as well. Now, if we're talking individuals, I don't know how you could get past the Darryn Peterson versus Caleb Wilson matchup as far as an individual matchup in this game as not being one of the fun ones. And I don't know how much they'll match up on each other. Kansas does switch. So I don't know that Peterson will start on Wilson, although it's entirely possible, right? Because if North Carolina is playing their jumbo lineup, which they started with in the opener, where Wilson at 6'10" was basically their 3. And if that's the case, there's a chance that Rosario at like 6'4" is guarding one of Kyan Evans or Seth Trimble, and then Melvin Council is guarding the other, and then you slide Peterson onto Wilson. So we might actually see that as the base matchup, but at the very least, you'll probably see it switched here or there. I have no idea how North Carolina is going to defend Darryn Peterson. Now, Wilson is known as being this like freak, toolsy, defensive prospect. Like, obviously he's scoring a lot right now, and you look at some of the box scores, and his dunking ability and athleticism have led to that. So I don't know. They might try to take away Darryn Peterson with length, and I don't think that's the worst idea. If I was Carolina, I might throw Wilson at least at times. Maybe they'll switch it up. So we might see a little bit of them on each other. But regardless, these are 2 freshman phenoms. Peterson, somebody who's in the running to be the number 1 pick in the draft, and Wilson, who certainly looks like a lottery pick to this point in time, maybe a top 10 pick in the NBA draft upcoming. It'll just depend on what the overall offense looks like, though. Again, he has been putting up big point totals. It's going to be a really fun matchup, and it's just overall this year in college basketball, like the freshman class is nuts. And we're going to have a lot more of these fun freshman on freshman matchups, but this is kind of the first that kicks it off. Now, we do have kind of a veteran matchup at center, and I think that's going to be a really fun one too. It's Flory Bidunga versus Henry Veesar, part 3. Now, the first 2 times that they played, it was more of Hunter Dickinson versus Henry Veesar, but Flory's still playing. Now, Dickinson went off for KU against Arizona in the game in Allen Fieldhouse, and Veesar really struggled. He only had 5 points. And then in the Big 12 tournament game, Veesar was a killer. He went for 19 points, and he was huge. So do we see one of those 2 guys in this game, or do we see kind of something in the middle? I think that's going to be interesting. And as we kind of look to, like, I don't know, if you're looking at like what centers could be potential All-Americans this year, I think you look at like not necessarily the winner of the game, because like whichever center is better might lose the game. But then again, if one of the 2 centers is definitively better than the other, it's going to really help their team to try to win the game, certainly. But I would think that, whoever performs better in that individual matchup, again, it will have a huge impact on both teams, but probably that would be the first indication that, like, okay, they could be an All-American, right? Because I would say that probably Flory and Veesar are probably both top 10 centers in the country, without getting more data and who else are going to be breakout candidates and stuff like that. Like, I feel like that'd just be kind of a round answer to give to. So I think that's going to be a fun matchup. And it's one that is very different than the Veesar Hunter Dickinson matchup, because, Hunter was certainly like stronger, like, I don't know, thicker, I guess you would say, than what Flory is. And so did that hurt Veesar in the first matchup? Was he able to outmaneuver him mobility wise in the second matchup? And you look at this, it's like, okay, well, Flory is not going to be outmaneuvered, athletically, you would think, but can Veesar push him a little bit? Like, Veesar's not the thickest dude either. So I think that's going to be a really hefty matchup, really fun matchup between 2 potential All-American centers this year, 2 potential all-conference guys at the center position. That certainly is going to have a big impact on who wins this game as well. All right, let's get further into that North Carolina scouting report, and then we'll finish up with matchups and keys to the game for KU to come out on top on Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by DoorDash. It is almost the weekend. Let's look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered. Powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered the most. Let's break it down. I think for Kansas this past week on the football field against Oklahoma State, Daniel Highshaw delivered in a big way. And really, it was the running back duo of Highshaw and LeSean Williams. Have you ever double dashed your order where you're ordering, two separate things. Nate Bargatze has a funny kind of cut up of this. Well, I guess that was like you double dashed with both Daniel Highshaw and Le'Shawn Williams and the two of those running backs coming together so that you could, get your meal and maybe get some ice cream, right? And it came together and it made a perfect blend. KU had a big time rushing game, almost 6 yards per carry, over 200 rushing yards against Oklahoma State. And those are the dudes that delivered for KU. And just like Kansas with Highshaw and Williams delivered, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day, giving a even further preview of the show. We caught up with Isaac Shade, who does LOCBB as well as Locked On Tar Heels, so check out that crossover episode. And then don't forget to check out some of our KU football content to get you ready for the Arizona game this week. All right, what does North Carolina bring to the table on the hardwood? So right now they are basically a top 30 team, depending where you look. Like Bart Torvik, top 25 team, Ken Palm, like top 30 team. They had a 94-54 victory over Central Arkansas in their opener. So very similar score to what KU did to their opponent. Under Basket Review, who I've been getting a lot of good preseason content from, they have them number 3 in the ACC in their preseason pick, just behind Duke and Louisville. And they have Henry Veesar as a first-team preseason selection. They have Seth Trimble as a third-team pick. And then, obviously, they didn't have Caleb Wilson on there, but I would imagine if they would have released that after exhibition play and how good he's looked, like maybe he would find his way on one of those teams. So, point being, this is a talented Carolina team. I do think it is a better overall team, certainly, than last year's team. I don't know. We'll see if you have a player as good as what RJ Davis was, but, it felt like with RJ Davis, I don't know. It feels like the peak was maybe the year before as opposed to last year. Maybe it was more about what was kind of around him, but it feels like there's better pieces overall for Carolina in the same way that, you're saying, okay, well, KU has better pieces to fit around Darryn Peterson. But they got Kyan Evans. He's a Kansas City kid, Colorado State transfer, really can shoot it. Luka Bogavats is an international player who can really stroke it. And then Jaron Stevenson is a 6'10" forward transfer from Alabama who's a really good athlete and defender. Jonathan Powell, he's kind of a big wing shooter that we saw against West Virginia last year. You look at 4 strengths for this North Carolina team. I would say size is definitely a strength of this team. Veesar is 7 foot with length. Stevenson is like 6'10", 6'11". Caleb Wilson is like 6'10" with a plus wingspan. And those 3 started in the first game. Now, will we see Bogavats starting? Whether we see that starting or not, we're going to probably see the jumbo lineup at a time where all 3 of those are out on the court. Even if it's just 2 of them, that is a big lineup. It's bigger than Kansas has. KU plays a 6'7" dude for the most of their minutes at the 4, right? So they're going to have the size advantage as Carolina. And even, Bogavats is 6'5", Powell's 6'6", kind of bigger wings on this team. This is a bigger team. How is Kansas going to handle the size? One of those, little runoffs from them being such a big team, I think, is the offensive rebounding. This is a good offensive rebounding team. They had 12 offensive rebounds against Central Arkansas. Now, you might point to that and say, hey, they're a big team. Of course, they're going to get offensive rebounds versus Central Arkansas. They had 2 exhibition games. One of them was against another team that, you blow out and you expect to win big. The other one was against BYU, which, BYU is seen as one of the best teams in the Big 12 and in the country this year. Between those 2 exhibition games, North Carolina had 32 offensive rebounds. So you total it up between the 3 performances they have, they're basically averaging 15 offensive rebounds per game. This is a good offensive rebounding team, and the size and athleticism is a big reason why. I think also something else that size kind of turns into is I think they're going to be a really good defensive team. It's funny because when you see teams who play at upper tempo, like in North Carolina, I think everybody immediately thinks of the offense, but I think this is actually going to be a better defensive team than it is offensively. BYU only shot 41.5% from the field against North Carolina. That is pretty low, albeit it was a bad 3-point shooting game. And was that North Carolina, their defense is so good, or was that just BYU had an uncharacteristically bad 3-point shooting game? But still, Winston-Salem shot just 25.5% on twos alone. And again, it's Winston-Salem State, but still 26% on twos. That's crazy. Central Arkansas was, again, Central Arkansas, but just 34% on twos. So obviously Kansas is going to be better equipped to, handle the size and athleticism, and they have some of their own than those two schools, but BYU struggled with it too. And this isn't an overly big, it's an athletic Kansas team. It's a lengthy and wingspan Kansas team, but it's not an overly big Kansas team. And so I can't help but wonder, does this turn into even if it's a high possession game, does it turn into a game that's in the high 70s as opposed to, you think high transition, good transition games from both teams, athletic teams, it could be in the 80s or 90s. I don't know. I think that'll be very interesting. Next strength for North Carolina is their fast break scoring, 56 fast break points over those 3 exhibition games. So basically 19 per game. That's a really, really strong number. Kansas has been pretty good in transition in the early going too. 4 weaknesses for North Carolina. What's the spacing going to be is kind of a question that I have. That might end up totally okay, because if Seth Trimble as a senior guard is, hitting 38% of his threes, if, Kyan Evans certainly can shoot it from the outside, Bogovats is somebody who can shoot off the bench, like Powell can shoot off the bench, like they might just be fine in terms of that. But there is a chance, and they did shoot well from 3 over the last 2 games, again, against lesser competition. But in the BYU game, they only have 4 of 19 from 3. Now, it's hard to take a 3-point shooting sample size from just one game, so I'm not going to overemphasize it. I'm just trying to come up with what potentially could be. And if they're playing some of these jumbo lineups, how good is the shooting going to be on a night-to-night basis? I don't know. How much quickness do they have at the guard spot specifically? That could be one area that Kansas has a decisive advantage in this game. Seth Trimble, solid athlete, but I don't think Seth Trimble is like Russell Westbrook back there. Kyan Evans, very efficient player, a good shooter and everything. But I think Melvin Council is going to be a better athlete than any of the guards they throw out there, just in terms of speed, quickness type of stuff. I think that, Kohl Rosario is going to be, if you're just talking vertically and speed, quickness stuff, is going to be up there with the North Carolina guards. Doesn't mean that the Kansas guards are going to have a better performance than the Carolina guards. I just think if Kansas is going to get a better performance from the guards, we're going to look back at it and say, okay, Kansas just had more athletic guards, right? Now, I think defensive rebounding is something that I have a question on for North Carolina. Veesar didn't have a great defensive rebound rate. It wasn't horrible, but it wasn't great either for Arizona last year. So far this year, North Carolina had a good defensive rebound rate in the Central Arkansas and Winston-Salem games, but again, they should in those games. In the BYU game, where you're playing a team more to your, equal in terms of length and athleticism and stuff like that, BYU had 18 offensive rebounds compared to 24 North Carolina defensive rebounds. So what that tells me is that, and again, maybe that was BYU's missing all these threes, long rebounds, make it a little bit harder there, but maybe that gives me a little hope that Kansas can grab some offensive rebounds to kind of match some of the offensive rebounds that North Carolina is grabbing. Plus, I do think it's interesting. Keba Keita, who is just monster athlete down low for BYU, that's not too dissimilar than what Kansas has with Flory Bidunga at the center position. But so I do think Kansas can crash the glass hard here, especially with North Carolina, with them being a transition team that sometimes they are going to try to leak out and get in transition. And then I would say this, I don't know that this is a weakness. I think we're still trying to decide or define where is Hubert Davis as a coach? Okay, on one hand, you could say, hey, he's been to a national title game. Another year, he got a 1 seed. On the other hand, you could say, okay, well, it's really been 1 year where he's gotten better than an 8 seed, and, the consistency hasn't been there. Regardless of what you think of Hubert Davis, I have a hard time not saying KU has the coaching advantage coming into this game. So I'll mention that there. Our players to watch for both teams for North Carolina, we're going to go with Kyan Evans, former Kansas City kid who went to Colorado State last year. That was a really good Colorado State team that made the second round of the tournament. He averaged 10.6 points per game, 47, 45, 85 shooting splits. It's 45 from 3. He put up 15, 6, and 5 in the opener. He's just a good player. He's one of the best shooters on the team, efficient player overall. Can a player I don't know, will it be Rosario, will it be Council on him? Can they, prevent him from kind of going off from 3? And then Henry Veesar, last year at Arizona, 9.5 points per game, 5 rebounds, 59% from the floor, 32 from 3. He had 14 points, 10 rebounds in the opener. He's even a solid passer for a big man, good pick and roll big as well. So that'll be interesting. And then for KU, I'm going to go with Darryn Peterson. Obviously, this is the real national everyone is watching moment. He's been awesome so far to this point in the year, but now it's like all the eyeballs are on him. I don't know. Maybe he just has this like monster performance. I'm also going to be interested to see who guards him from North Carolina, as we talked about earlier. Can he avoid the cramping? Like, what if this is a close game and he has to go out for 8 minutes due to cramping? Is that because Kansas isn't as deep of a team? Kansas doesn't have that necessarily like other star, point creator in the half court. What would that mean? And then the other guy is Bryson Tiller. Going back to the idea that North Carolina has this like jumbo lineup. Maybe this is a game where KU plays even more of the two big lineup to kind of counter that. Maybe we see Flory at the 4 and B at the 5 for 5 minutes. Maybe we see 10, 15 minutes of Tiller at the 4 with Flory at the 5 or MB at the 5. I think he represents a good opportunity because it's not just that North Carolina has the jumbo lineup. It's that North Carolina's big men who, they're athletic, they're mobile. Right. And Tiller provides somebody who can kind of counter that and match that in a real way. And we've seen him play big and play well so far this season. This would be another big moment, kind of another notch in his belt if he could do just that. Let's get to the keys to the game for KU to come out with the victory. This is Locked on Jayhawks. And today's episode of the show is brought to you by SupplyHouse. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with SupplyHouse. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process just smoother. Join the free Trademaster program today and get some serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. Again, check out Locked on College Basketball for your second listen every day. All right, keys to the game for KU to take out North Carolina on the road. Let's start with the KU offense. I think you need to get those extra possessions on the offensive glass. Again, North Carolina gave up 18 offensive rebounds to BYU in that exhibition game. If your three balls aren't falling, if you're KU, which to this point in the season, we haven't really seen Kansas be a super efficient or consistent three-point shooting team. So there's a chance that's the case. How do you make up for it in other ways? One of those ways would be grabbing offensive rebounds. Plus North Carolina, whether it was under Roy Williams or if it's under Hubert Davis, they just typically you think of them as being an elite offensive rebounding team. Certainly some of the numbers early in the season, certainly the size, length, athleticism that they have makes you think they're going to be a good offensive rebounding team again this year. Well, if you're getting offensive rebounds, it's helping to kind of counter and match some of the extra possessions they're getting. I would also say for the offense, like this is, I think, the game where you're going to need at least a couple threes out of Rosario and or Dawson. Like if you got 3 combined made threes from those two players, I think that'd be a big win for KU because that has been a little more inconsistent and a bit more of an unknown to this point. But if you're trying to win one on the road against a talented opponent, it would help if you nailed a couple threes. I think for the KU defense, how does KU match up with North Carolina's size on that end of the floor? Like in general, I have no idea how Kansas is going to defend teams this year, not just North Carolina, like teams in general with good wings or with like big wings or a bunch of them. And Carolina kind of has both. Like if they go to Bogovats off the bench, like a good kind of big shooting wing. If you're going with the jumbo lineup where Wilson's at the 3, even when they're just going with Wilson at the 4 or Stevenson at the 4, can Trey White defend a bigger guy, right? And if they do throw out a lineup with multiple wings, okay, well, Kansas doesn't have a ton of wings on this roster. So how do they match up? I think if you do well today, it certainly would make you feel better about how they can match up in some future games against some of those opponents. But, there's going to be a lot of matchups this year where Kansas plays against a team who has, multiple big forwards or who has a couple really good wings, and how are they going to match up? And so going back to Bryson Tiller, like maybe this is a game where we see more of Trey White at the 3, Tiller at the 4, Flory at the 5, just from a size perspective to match up, or Flory at the 4 and Embiid at the 5. I think that might actually make a little bit of sense in this specific matchup. Now the counter to that would be, okay, do you just try to outspeed it, right? Do you try to, the problem is like Caleb Wilson, even though he's the size of a big at 6'10", he runs like a guard. So it's a little harder to outspeed it from that perspective, but maybe that is the counter. Maybe KU just says, hey, the natural inclination would be, okay, match their big, Maybe we need to zig when it's zagging. Maybe we do go small. Maybe we try to beat him with Melvin Council's speed and stuff like that. And then you kind of cross match. Like, is it Council on Trimble, or is it Council on Evans? Is it Rosario on the other? Is it Peterson on Wilson? Is it Trey White on Stevenson? Or is it Trey White on Wilson and Peterson on Stevenson, who's maybe not as big of an offensive threat, but then would have a size advantage? And then you'd be worrying about Darryn Peterson, banging down low all game. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting, and I'll be very curious how KU kind of matches it up on the defensive end. But can they handle that size of Carolina, keep them off the glass as much as possible, but also keep them from getting all those easy buckets and transition runouts and dunks on the inside? Our player matchup in this one is Caleb Wilson against, I guess, take your pick, Trey White, Bryson Tiller, Darryn Peterson, whoever KU's 3 or 4 is. Wilson's been a beast so far this year. 22 points in just 24 minutes in their opener. Very reminiscent of what Darryn Peterson did. He had similar numbers in the 2 exhibition games too. He's a super skilled forward, can play the 3 or the 4, really good athlete, can rebound, pass, defend. He certainly looks like a lottery pick, if not higher, in the NBA draft. And in general, I don't know how KU is going to defend teams with those, good wings, going back to that. So I don't know who's going to defend him necessarily, but that'll be interesting. And then at the other end, who does he defend? Because he's known as being a very good defensive prospect. Does that take that player out of the game, right? If he takes Trey White out of the game, if he's guarding him, is that okay because it's not Darryn Peterson? Or does he try to guard Darryn Peterson, and does that make Peterson's life rough, and then somebody else has to beat you for KU? I think that's going to be very interesting. And then our Hawk to Soar KU player we think is set up to have a big game. I like Melvin Council here. In a game that Carolina, they like to run, Kansas is a team that is kind of typically under Bill Self, like they'll play either way. They'll run a little bit, they'll slow it down a little bit, like usually more middle in tempo. I think Melvin Council's transition game plays up. He is a very good transition player with his speed, his decision-making, and I think that'll be good in this matchup. I also like again, I'm not saying Seth Trimble and Kyan Evans aren't good athletes. I think they're fine athletes. I just don't think they're like explosive athletes necessarily. And I think Melvin Council is an explosive athlete. And I think he can use a bit of that speed against the North Carolina guards. I think KU needs him to have a big game, and I think he will have a big game for the Jayhawks. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out our KU football content, KU Keys against Arizona, as well as our KU Arizona preview. We also had a crossover preview with Isaac Shade of Locked On Tar Heels. Talk a little KU Carolina there as well. And we'll see you for a postcast with whatever happens after the game right here on Locked On Jayhawks.